Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
But now I'm absolutely thrilled to be joined by Labour's Shadow Chancellor, John McDonnell. Very good to see you this morning. Now, you've talked about Labour wanting to remain in what you've called a customs union. Look, I'm obviously a bit thick, but what is the difference between a customs union and the customs union?
It's the ability to be able to influence the trade deals that will go off in the future. If the argument is if we remain in the customs union, like Turkey, you don't have that same level of influence. So we're suggesting a customs union should be on the table for negotiation. Right. So instead of having this asymmetric relationship, you have a symmetrical relationship where you can influence those. I think...
So can I just... Because I just want to be clear, therefore, that I do... Which I think I do understand what you're saying, but I just do want to clarify. You are perfectly happy with membership of a customs union where third-party trade deals are done by the European Union, so long as we can influence those trade deals.
What we're saying to the government is don't take that off the table, because I think there's a constructive debate to be had around that. And in talking to other Europeans, again, there's a real discussion that could be had around that. So we're saying to the government, don't take this off the table. We've got to have this debate, and in some ways I welcome what the Prime Minister is doing in saying we're now going to set out what our purposes and what our ambitions are, etc. I find it a bit bizarre that she's not allowing Philip Hammond or Amber Rudd to participate in that.
She has categorically said actually that she wouldn't allow, if she's Prime Minister, the UK to remain in the kind of customs union you are talking about.
I think it's the wrong way around. I think what she's doing now should have been done ages ago. What we want to do is say, look, this is the sort of Britain we want for the future. This is the sort of Britain and Europe we want for the future. What is the relationship and what are the best structures to achieve that? If she's coming out with a similar sort of debate, at least we can engage in that debate now and it'll be a rational debate. But what we're saying is, do not rule out some of these structures, like a customs union, before you have that debate.
Now, your colleague Andrew Gwynne just said, actually, over on the BBC, that another thing that Labour is very critical about is this idea that the transition period should be a maximum of 2 years. So how long do you think it could or should be?
What we've said, I think Keir Starmer's got it exactly right on this. He says as short as possible, but as long as necessary. We've said to the government, look,
Andrew Gwynne said it's inconceivable that we could negotiate a trade deal within the 20 months.
Well, ask Liam Fox, because I don't think, 7 years is the average for a trade deal that could be negotiated. So what we're... So
could we be in the transition period for 7 years,
I think we've got to be realistic. We've said 2 years to remain in the customs union and single market.
As a minimum?
As a minimum. That gives us the stability. Beyond that, I can't see it going much beyond that, but... What we've said is at least give us that stability for that period. At the moment, there's no stability. And businesses and trade unions and others are coming to us supporting that view, and I'm hoping that we'll get consensus with the government on that eventually.
When I talk to representatives of other governments in Europe, they say they can't understand why this government is looking for a transition rather than asking the EU for simply an extension of membership. Because they say, wouldn't it be better for the UK to continue to be able... I mean, you say you want influence over future trade deals as part of a customs union, but why not argue just to stay in the EU until everything is negotiated?
The whole purpose of our intent, really, is to try and bring the country back together again. We mustn't do anything, I think, that divides the country again. It is divided already. I've been touring around, speaking in smaller towns in particular up north, and there is still that strong division within our society. We mustn't do anything that exacerbates those divisions. Our purpose is to bring people back together again. And above all else, we should do nothing that allows the right, the UKIPs, to reinvent themselves around this particular issue. So I think we need to have patient, moderate discussion of what our objectives are, what our relationship should be and what the structures will work effectively for us.
But, I mean, even Jacob Rees-Mogg has said that the problem with being in a transition rather than remaining in as member of the EU is that we become effectively a vassal state. But that must worry, doesn't it?
Of course it does, and that's why part of our... If we were in the negotiations now, we would be saying, look, can we negotiate the sort of relationship we have during that period in which we do have a say, in which we are part of the rule-making rather than the rule-taking? And I think there's a new spirit in the negotiations in Europe in particular that is now looking more constructively at how we can go forward. But what you can't have is this attitude, you know, from the Prime Minister. If she doesn't get everything she wants, she's going to walk away. I've negotiated in Europe in my professional life. You negotiate best on the basis of mutual interest and mutual trust. One of the things we could... I just throw one thing into it. One of the things we could do to restore some of that mutual trust is give EU citizens the rights that they need.
Now, the other big thing you've been talking about over the weekend are your plans to take back into control a series of important industries, water, rail, Royal Mail. In the 70s, up to the time that many of these industries were nationalised, they chronically under-invested. I mean, the concern that many people would have is that nationalisation will simply allow these industries to wither on the vine.
That's why we're not going back to that model. That centralised, status, bureaucratic model will never work again. What we're looking at is a devolved models where you bring together at the region. Take water, for example, at the regional level.
And there was terrible underinvestment in water during the years.
But what we've had since then with privatisation, we published the figures today from the House of Commons Library. £14 billion worth given out in shares to shareholders, dividends to shareholders, at the same time underinvestment, and at the same time prices going up 40%.
But there has been a significant increase in investment relative to the period of public ownership.
Based upon borrowing. When water was privatised, all borrowing was wiped off. They've now massively increased the borrowing, increased the charges to customers, and paid dividends to shareholders, many of whom are in tax havens not paying taxes. We're being ripped off. So what we're saying is we want a model... Look, in Wales now, water is provided on a not-for-profit
What is this model then? Say these things won't be 100% owned by the public sector.
This is what's happening right the way across Europe, actually. What it will be publicly owned. You'll bring together the workers, the consumers and the expert managers to manage it in a devolved regional basis for water.
So owned by the government, 100%, but managed on a different basis?
Owned by the public. Managed on the...
When you say with the public, just to be clear, because you mean by the state?
The people. We will own water. We will buy it back from the shareholders. We'll issue them
at market value. Will you buy it at market value?
Parliament will determine the value. All nationalisations...
So you won't give a commitment that you'll buy it at the market price?
Parliament will determine the value. That's always been the case when we bring things back into public ownership. What would
be the alternative to buying it at market value?
Well, Parliament will determine. They'll take into account, for example, what's happened in terms of debt levels, investment levels, that sort of... Parliament will determine the price. We'll issue bonds for shares, and on that basis, because this is a profitable industry, the income we get for that will cover any borrowing costs. But also, if you look at the latest research...
Can I just pick up one little point?
Well, let me just finish this point. Please, If you look at the latest research, all the evidence demonstrates that if we cut out this, 18 billion of the last 10 years that's gone in dividends to shareholders, if we cut out that, we'll be able to reduce prices and have consistent investment, which we haven't had so far.
I should just point out, though, that you are making an assumption, which is that a future government, Labour government that nationalised, would be able to borrow at the same low interest rates as are currently the case. Because if interest rates went up, of course, then there would be less money to invest.
If you look at the level of profit,
water.
if you look at the level of profits made in the water sector, they'll be sufficient to cover even if interest rate goes up.
And I'm delighted that John McDonnell wasn't deselected during the ads, and he's still here. But before we get back to the interview, a few words from Allegra.
John has already swiveled round in his chair. You've been on this programme enough times to know. But look, since the election gave the Tories the fright of their life, Labour have had a bit of a swagger, have they not? But the question is, are they doing as well as they should be? Look at this. This is pretty complicated, but I will try to walk you through. This is the change in support for the opposition 8 months after an election, OK? Remember him, William Hague, IDS, David Cameron. They're all putting up quite a lot of support. They go up in support after 8 months after election. 8 months after 2010, you've got Ed Miliband in charge, and he's up +6. Jeremy Corbyn in the 2015 election, +1. But then look at this, not so good. Since the 2017 election, he is down, John McDonnell. He is down by 3. You are nodding very gravely. Marginally down. OK, well, we can discuss that in a second. But it is nonetheless, compared to these healthy numbers, not so good. So then let's look more closely at what has actually happened. So you can see Labour in red, of course, and it's very, very healthy up here. And then goes down. And let's just animate on what has happened, quite how bad a time the government has had, and yet Labour has not managed to capitalise. So very quickly, this point is when Theresa May had that terrible conference. The letters fell off the screen. It was all a disaster, and yet Labour goes down. Here we have 2 cabinet ministers resigning, and Labour just flatlines. And here, Health Secretary told me this week this has been the worst ever winter for the health service, and yet you're not capitalising. Why are you not doing better?
Let me do 2 things. One, we had the big, 12 months ago, we were 24 points behind. We had the big surge in the general election campaign. And then after that, we've been round about 40 points in the polls. All of this is within a 3-point margin of error, so that's that. But I think Brexit...
But are you disappointed that you haven't consolidated what looked like in the immediate aftermath of the election to be a bit of a lead for you? In fact, it's been eroded.
I didn't... Again, it's not that much of a lead after the election. It's about 3 or 4 points within the margin of error. My view, and this sounds a bit counterintuitive, I know, you mentioned swagger before. I don't think any of us have been swaggering, but actually I've been saying to people, we need something like this to also say, look, every vote has to be won, every vote has to be battled for, and Brexit changes the atmosphere as well.
Well, I was going to ask you about that, because you very generously said that you'd read the book what I wrote, and therefore you'll be completely aware about the British election study, which said that the main reason for the surge, the number one reason, there were other reasons as well, the number one reason was actually that voters didn't believe your election manifesto and thought you were more pro-European than the Tories. Well, and so the question is, shouldn't you consolidate that by formally saying, Labour, for example, would remain a member of the single market, would remain a member of the customs union, because that would consolidate that pro-EU vote?
That's the one part of a very good book I thought was a bit iffy.
Come on, answer the question.
I'll answer the question.
Because the British election study is the most serious analysis of why people vote.
No, I agree. But if you drill down into that study as well, you can see that our leads on the NHS and all the rest of it, we built up.
Sure.
What we need to do now, and this is a tougher politics now on Brexit, if we are, and this is our ambition, and I think it's the right ambition, if it is about healing the wounds of Brexit, bringing people together, that's a tougher politics than just plumping for one issue.
Sure. Nobody's saying you should be a single-issue party.
Well, what I'm saying is that it is a tougher politics if you're trying to build consensus, and it is a slower politics to build up that consensus. But I think we're doing it because we think it's the right thing for the country, not just the right thing for our party.
And I was struck that when Jeremy Corbyn was sitting in that seat, he said he was, at the moment, against the British people having a second vote. But he absolutely refused to say that there might not come... He refused to say that he was ruling out a second vote forever.
Yeah, because we're worried that if you did go for example, like Alistair and others have said, look, why don't we have a second referendum? It divides the country again, and those divisions are really still there.
No, but you're, I think, saying the same as Jeremy, that right now you don't think it's the right thing, but you're not saying there might not be circumstances in which a second referendum
we'd never turn our back on democratic engagement, but our worry at the moment is if you had another referendum, it would divide the country again, and at the same time we would open up the potential of that sort of right-wing xenophobia, part of which we saw...
But what happens if in the autumn, when Parliament gets this meaningful vote, that Parliament says that Theresa May's deal is not the deal that Parliament wants? In those circumstances, surely there would have to be a referendum.
Well, I think better we have a general election. Better we have a general election.
On the issue?
On the issue and all the other issues, because you then have a wider debate as well.
But it's interesting you're saying better, not ruling out a referendum.
Well, I think the better route is through a general election. Let me just say on the polling, counterintuitively, I've been talking to our own people, our own members, etc., and in some ways the polling, that narrowness has helped us, but because it's waking up to people that actually we're not just going to walk into government, it's not going to drop in our lap, we have to fight for every vote. And interestingly, if you look at the council by-elections, the real votes where we're really campaigning hard, we're winning very well.
Lovely to see you. See you again soon, I very much hope. Now let's see what Theresa Villiers and Alistair Campbell made of that. I mean, I took that, actually, as John McDonnell, and therefore, might say, you know, the Jeremy Corbyn Labour Party moving rather more in your direction. I mean, his description of the kind of customs union that a Labour government would want to be part of sounded to me like broadly the customs union with a wrinkle.
Well, I hope so, but I mean, you know, you talk about talking to European politicians. I think we're kidding ourselves if we think the public or European politicians actually see that much difference between the two main parties on this. They're both going to end up in the same place. They're basically saying, whatever the cost, whatever the chaos, whatever the damage to the economy, whatever the Brexit impact assessment saying, double-digit falling growth in the northeast of England, they may have voted Leave, but they're going to be the ones hardest hit. We are still basically on the road out, and it doesn't matter what happens, that is going to happen.
Do you agree with that, John?
No. Look, Alistair, stop dividing us. If we've got
the country is divided.
That is not what we're saying. What we're saying is
the party members.
Let him speak, Alistair.
No, he's just accused me of being divisive. Party members want to see more leadership on this.
That's the sort of macho threatening politics that has divided this country. What we need to do now is have a rational, moderate debate about the pros and cons of our future and what relationships we need. To exaggerate individual people's or parties' position doesn't help that. What we're trying to do is bring people together about building our future.
But you're also
and the
saying,
relationship
whatever happens, we're out of Europe.
No, we're saying we respect the referendum result, and we have to build a new relationship with Europe which will bring our people together again. I think that's doable, because actually I think in a traditional British compromise, that's what people want.
What is the compromise?
The compromise is tariff-free access to the single market. Yes, a customs union, if necessary, if we can agree an appropriate one, and then building upon a future Europe that is prosperous on the basis of trade between European countries.
Anyway, I think I've got to have some role in this programme, so I'm not going to ask Theresa. I want to really put to you, actually, the question that I put to John McDonnell, which is the transition. I mean, Jacob Rees-Mogg is right, isn't he? We become a vassal state. You know, we get some of the advantages of EU membership, but no influence. Wouldn't it be better during that period where we're negotiating the trade deal to ask the EU to extend our period of membership?
No, I don't think it would. I think a transition...
Why not?
Because that would lock us into things like free movement, lock us into...
But we're going to be locked into free movement anyway, according to Michel Barnier.
Well, not necessarily. That isn't decided yet. A transition period makes a degree of sense to give businesses more certainty, more time to plan. The crucial thing is what happens at the end of the implementation period and what our relationship is then.
Can I just ask you one quick question? Because we'll have plenty of time to talk about this more after the break. But if Theresa May agrees that the rights of EU citizens coming to the UK during the transition should be the same as current EU migrants here, will you vote against her deal?
Yeah, on compromises like that, I'd look carefully at what was proposed, might be prepared to support them depending on the context. I do think for the transition period in particular, we should be prepared to compromise so long as what we get at the end of the implementation period, when exit happens in full, is the right relationship. That is the crucial set of decisions.
Very interesting that you said you might be prepared to support the Prime Minister. Anyway.
Now, the recent collapse of Carillion and the ending of the East Coast Rail franchise early has emboldened the Labour Party to push its agenda for renationalising key services such as rail, water and energy. But that's not all. The party is also looking into supporting local economies by helping councils do things like bring more services in-house, using small local businesses where possible, and helping people set up small-scale energy companies. So is this plan workable, and can it help Labour shed the image that more state control will lead to inefficiency and a lack of innovation? Elizabeth Glinka has travelled to Preston, a Labour council the party are championing as a model for the future, to find out more.
When he visited in the 1850s, Karl Marx declared that industrial Preston might be the staging post for an economic revolution. Well, it's taken 160 years, but he may have been onto something.
Right Honourable John McDonnell.
Preston described in the press as a pilgrimage for London folk.
The Shadow Chancellor just dropping in this week to heap praise on Preston's new locally focused economic plan. And nowhere is that plan more visible than at the city's trendy undercover market, as traders rush to finish their new stalls ahead of next week's reopening.
The so-called Preston model borrows heavily from similar schemes in the American Rust Belt. It extols the virtues of keeping more services in-house using worker-led cooperatives. And when it comes to big contracts like the redevelopment of this beautiful Victorian market, well, they go not to the overextended big boys like Carillion, but to smaller local firms, keeping the money in the area.
Everything's gonna be okay. The man credited with masterminding the Preston model is Matt Brown, a local boy motivated by what he saw as the continued decline of a once great city.
We've come to the conclusion that to fight back, we've got to do it ourselves. We can't be dependent on either central government who's cutting back on money or big corporations that aren't rooted in our community. All the public sector pretty much is buying locally from local suppliers. We're looking to form cooperatives. We're selling our own energy in partnership with other councils, and the pension funds investing locally. These alternatives are all around the globe now, in American cities like New York, Cleveland, Barcelona. I think people are waking up to the fact we've got an economy that just works for the top 1% of people, and the rest of us, we're just basically fighting for the scraps.
Under the Preston model, the City Council has spent an additional £4 million locally since 2012. It's also persuaded what it calls the other anchor institutions, like universities and hospitals, to redirect their spending towards local suppliers. And it's not just Preston. A number of other Labour authorities are trying something new.
We've got local councils now who have set up energy companies providing cheap alternative renewable energy. We've got others now who are running bus networks. In some ways it's going back to the municipalisation of the 19th century, and that was done not just by Labour, it was done by Liberals and even Conservative administrations as well. It's a way of getting best value for money as well as having democratic control of your services.
Your critics might say this is a bit of cuddly cooperative window dressing for an agenda which long term is about mass renationalisation, which you think maybe the public wouldn't be so keen on.
How sceptical people could be. No, I'm a socialist. I believe that we should share our wealth. So here we have councillors going out to get elected, and then when they get elected they say we're going to use our council resources locally, and in that way we can benefit local people.
So is it back to the future? It was revealed this week that the government may be on the brink of renationalising the East Coast Main Line. Labour's front bench has been clear about its aspiration to renationalise not just rail, but energy, the post office and even water. This weekend, the party held a conference to discuss the expansion of the Preston model, but others remain less convinced by its wisdom.
This idea is very, very popular nowadays, both on the political right, people like Trump are promoting it, and on the political left. But really it's just a failure to understand the benefits of trade. The idea that you can enrich yourself with a border. So I draw a line around an area, and somehow that will make us better off, is magical thinking. How you become better off is through becoming more productive. These ideas that are tricks for becoming richer, that involve boundaries. It's an abiding fantasy, but it is a fantasy.
Well, the doubters may doubt, but in a post-Carillion world, Labour is convinced public opinion is pulling in its direction.
That looks quite heavy.
Well, to help us all understand more about Labour's plans, I'm joined by Labour's Shadow Transport Secretary, Andrew McDonnell, who's in Newcastle. Good morning. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning.
John McDonnell says that the plans to renationalise energy, water, rail would cost absolutely nothing. Now, that sounds too good to be true. Explain to us how that could work.
Well, in terms of the railways, we would be bringing those rail services back into public ownership at no cost at all. We would simply take them back once those franchises expire, and that would be at very considerable savings of at least £1 billion per annum once we've got all of those services back under the public ownership. But
then you're going to have to find about £70 billion for the water industry, nearly £40 billion for the national grid. How can that cost absolutely nothing?
Because you'll be acquiring an asset, you'll be exchanging bonds for shares, you'll be borrowing that money, you'll be acquiring the asset, You'll be paying that back from the revenues that you derive from those businesses over time, and you'll be able to keep costs down for the consumer.
You'll be adding to the national debt, and you will have to pay interest on that debt, which you will do out of the revenue that you get from the companies. But you also say that this is going to cost less for consumers, that bills are going to come down. It's going to be one or the other, isn't it?
Well, no, not if you've got £13.5 billion of the dividends paid out. If you can run things on a not-for-profit basis, then it can ensure that customers can get the best possible returns.
Oh, well, not-for-profit might be good for customers, but that doesn't sound very good for paying back the interest on the loans that you took out in order to buy the organisations in the first place.
We've heard John McDonnell express the analogy about having a mortgage over a property. You've acquired the asset, you've got the income derived from renting it out, it pays for the asset, and you've still got it. So it makes consummate sense to hold those assets and make them work for the benefit of our citizens, rather than for the benefit of shareholders.
That everybody can understand. That's a good one. If interest rates rise after you've bought that house and you're renting it out, it's very possible that your costs could rise above what you're deriving from the rental income. We know that interest rates are on the way up. The Bank of England have told us that. There's every possibility, isn't there, that the interest you'll be paying to have acquired these organisations won't cover, the profits simply won't cover the costs.
Well, it's no different to the position now. If water companies or energy companies are financed, they've got those structures in place, the rate of interest that they pay on their financing is passed through to the consumer ultimately.
Well, so I'll tell you how it's different now, because under your system, it would be passed to the taxpayer, presumably. If any of these industries were to start making a loss, you weren't generating the money that you needed, who picks up the tab for that?
Well, have they made a loss since they were privatised? They haven't. They've made very great profits for a whole range of energy and water
why have Stagecoach given up the East Coast
companies.
franchises? Because they've lost £200 million.
Well, if you want to talk about the East Coast franchise, that actually just shows how the franchising system is completely and utterly flawed and should be abandoned. And this
but if the government-run East Coast line lost £200 million, who would be on the hook for that money?
Well,
the taxpayer?
Hang on, sir. When the government last ran East Coast Main Line, they ran it at a profit. It brought monies into the Treasury. So we've got a good history about running the railways correctly and not having this bailout to Richard Branson and Brian Souter and the rest of them, or seeing the dividends and profits overseas to Nederlander Spoorwegen or Deutsche Bahn, the state-owned companies of continental Europe. We want to put an end to that and make sure that we run our railways for the benefit of the public. It's a public service ultimately.
All right, well, let's look at one company, Bristol Energy, that looks like the kind of company you're advocating. It's been set up locally, it's committed to ethical behaviour, giving best deals to people who can least afford to heat their homes. There's no shareholders, so nobody's taking a profit out of it. It's lost more than £2 million over 2 years and doesn't expect to be profitable until 2021. That doesn't sound like a great deal for the taxpayer if that's how you're going to run the national grid.
Well, it depends what the profitability is in 2021. I mean, if they're recouping those losses and they've got a trajectory of growth and greater incomes, they would look at that and say that was successful. But
hang on, you're saying a Labour government could nationalise all of these industries?
They got tax breaks, they got a public capital to set them up in the first instance. They were heavily subsidised in the first instance so they could then go on and enjoy the benefits of private enterprise. And that does not benefit the consumer or the taxpayer or the citizen, however you wish to describe it. And that's what we're about.
The consumer and the taxpayer may be the same person, but they have a different financial relationship with these companies. What comes first? Using any profits or revenue to pay off the debt you've incurred to acquire these assets, or cutting bills for consumers? What would you do first?
You do both. If you've got that income, you can use it for those purposes.
If you've got enough income, you can. But if you have to make a choice, which one do you do? Do you cut energy bills, or do you repay the debt?
Well, those that have benefited from privatisation have had the benefit of not only using that money to pay the debt that they incurred to buy the assets, they're now using it to make dividend payments out to their shareholders. So it quite clearly can be done, and we want to be in that position so it works for the benefit of people, not for corporate entities.
And of course the shareholders who you describe aren't all millionaire individuals. Actually, a lot of this is owned by pension funds, into which all of us many workers' pensions are held. Can you guarantee that you will reimburse them at full market value so that nobody whose pension is invested in any of these utilities is going to lose out?
Well, of course, the market value is the market value at the time that these assets are acquired. So that's John McDonnell's made that clear, that they will be acquired at that proper.
But not for cash in exchange for government bonds.
At proper rate. But they're still in that strong position of having that value fully reflected. But of course, what is happening is that those, as consumers, because not everybody's a shareholder, it means that there's greater equity for all of the population, not just a narrow segment of it. And surely that's got to be for the benefit of everybody.
OK, well, Andy McDonnell, thanks very much for talking to us this morning. Now, a few minutes ago, we were talking to Labour's Andy McDonnell about Labour's plans for nationalisation of energy, water, rail, something they think is a good vote-winning policy for them in these post-Carillion times. So are they right to be pushing this quite as hard as they are?
Look, nationalisation is having an absolute boom in popularity. It never went out of fashion to want the railways renationalised. And since the bailouts of rail companies, since the appalling things that have happened to people who have to get a train every day, you know, never mind just the southeast. It's been a nightmare, and costs have ratcheted up. There are very few people who really disagree with renationalising the railways, and in terms of nationalising water, even the water companies aren't really opposing it that much. So I think they're pushing it an open door, and I think it's a kind of worthwhile thing for them to do.
But John McDonnell says that it can be done at absolutely no cost, and he has this plan where you'd buy them out, but you would have this asset on your government books that would then produce enough revenue to pay off the interest payments on the debt. Is that realistic?
No, I mean that's the aspect of it. I can see the political logic, but that's the aspect of it that I find most confusing. And this argument that essentially Parliament, rather than the market, dictates the price at which the asset is bought. The signal is not just to people who are in those industries. The signal is to all other investors in just about everything else. I mean, if you start with certain sectors, what is going to be nationalised next? The impact that then has on people who are investing money in the UK is simply a dawning realisation that what they have, what they own, what they paid for, might be stolen or might be discounted by the state.
Labour were fairly clear in their manifesto. They talked about the National Grid, water, rail, the Royal Mail, not anything else.
Well, as someone who's been reading and paying attention to what John McDonnell and Seamus Milne think and what their ideal model for an economy is, I'll take the evidence of what they've written and said about this stuff over the last 20 or 30 years rather than what they're trying to do now to win an election.
I wouldn't try and extrapolate what Labour policy is going to be from what Seamus has written over the past 20 years. He's only been their comms guy for, what, since Corbyn became leader. Before that, he was a Guardian columnist. I mean,
well, I'm judging people on their record, on Andrew Murray, what he's written, what Seamus Milne, who is a key figure next to Corbyn, and what McDonnell, who's the real brains behind the operation, have argued for.
I think the thing is,
I simply question whether we should accept their guarantees when they are when they're trying to bargain their way into power. It's understandable. It's politics.
Listen, nobody. It's something that only happens to this lot of Labour leaders. That people, if they can't critique the policy they suggest enough, then critique what they perceive to be the nefarious under policy. Now, the policy is.
To Tories quite
I don't think it does. The truth is, you know, when we talk about privatising industries, when we used to talk about privatising industries, we never talked about them in terms of the outrageous bailouts they would need. We never talked about them in terms of what they would do to actual costs. We just talked about them in terms of principle. Do you want this privatised, efficiency, excellence, or do you want this nationalised?
There are certainly problems with privatised industries, and some things which even now Margaret Thatcher would say that was not the original intention. However, she and those around her were completely clear and explicit about they were prepared to privatise almost everything, but wasn't nailed down. They were unambiguous about it.
The fairest possible reading of the way Thatcher went about it was that she didn't know how bad it would be. You know, she went into privatisation with the explicit agenda of more British people owning shares in industries, and what happened was when she went into it, 40% of people owned shares in British industries.
Yes,
by 10 years later, 12% did.
Privatisation was a huge success.
At that point, we'll need to leave it there and move on.